Hi there. In this lesson, I'll tell you what objects and components are. You'll learn what standard components are in the engine, see how to work with them, and change their parameters. It's time to start the game. Click the play button, and look at something dynamic. For example, make falling boxes. All objects in Unity consist of a set of components. The objects themselves are called game objects. A game object is what we see in the hierarchy window. Each game object contains a certain number of components. Components set some properties to an object. They can be deleted and added. In the following lessons, we will write our own scripts, which will also be components. That means that we describe some behavior in the script and then add this behavior to the object. First, let's talk about some of the standard components that are already in Unity. We've seen that there are objects in Unity, right? And all these objects consist of a certain number of components. For example, directional light has the components transform and light. Transform is responsible for the position of this object in space, and light is responsible for the properties of the light source. The main camera has its own components as well, transform, as well as some camera properties. All three-dimensional bodies also have a certain number of components. The cube has a mesh filter and a mesh renderer. Here's an example of what these components do. The mesh filter is responsible for what this object itself will look like. It is actually said here that it uses a mesh cube, so it looks like a cube. For example, the mesh renderer is responsible for how it will be rendered on the screen. Here we choose what kind of material this object will have, whether it will cast shadows, you can turn on or turn off shadows, or whether it will accept shadows, and all sorts of parameters like that. The box collider is responsible for how this object will interact physically with other objects in the scene. Later in this lesson, we'll see what it looks like in practice. Components can be added to objects and deleted. But before we talk about components, let's see what other objects we can create in Unity. Here we saw that there are different 3D objects. Create them all. Besides these cubes and cylinders, there are also quad and plane objects. The most simple and primitive ones. By the way, if you're wondering about the difference between a quad and a plane, they differ in wireframe. You can select the shaded wireframe mode in this tab, then you will see polygons, triangles, which everything in Unity consists of. Everything actually consists of triangles. Besides these simple figures, what else is there? You can create text. If you want some text to be above the head of the character, you need to press this button. Some letters may be actually present in the 3D scene. We can also create various effects. Here, for example, is a particle system. We will talk about this in more detail later, as well. This can be configured differently. You can create smoke, fire, and many other effects. The trail effect is a tail that can follow a bullet, or just a line that is drawn in a 3D space somewhere on the screen. You can also create different light sources from here. For example, point light source. Here you can actually see how it illuminates our scene not intensively. The intensity can be increased. There are different types of light, point light, spotlight, and director light. You also create sounds from here. Audio source. All interface elements will be created here later. These are different texts, pictures on the screen, sliders, drop-down menus, text input fields. All this is also here. Objects can be created not only from the Game Object tab, but also if you right-click hierarchy here and create it. I usually create this way, because this way you can create one object inside another object. If you want to attach eyes to the sphere, you can create two more spheres inside it, and they will be its daughter objects right away. Again, all we see is an object, and it consists of a set of components. We can create a cube this way. Let's delete all the objects that are here in the scene so that everything is clean and empty, and create an empty game object. Create empty, and call it a cube. An empty object is an object that has only transform and nothing else. It is just a certain point, a position on the screen. I can move it to 0 coordinates and approach it with the F button. So let's make a cube out of it. To do this, add those components that the cube had to it. In the Component tab, go to the Mesh section and add a Mesh filter. The cube also had a Mesh renderer component. We also find it here. In the Mesh filter, we need to specify which kind of mesh this object will have. You can click this roundel and you will be provided with all the models that are now in this project. I'll choose the standard cube model. It's pink now because we added Mesh Renderer but didn't configure it. It doesn't have any material in this field right now. You know how to create materials. Create material. You can call this material, and we can place it into this field. That's it, the cube is ready. There was also a collider component on our cube. Component, physics, box collider. Now, this box is completely indistinguishable from the one we created from the GameObject tab. Now, let's do something interesting. For example, let's make this box fall. Or we can create several boxes and let them all fall on each other. So that they just don't fall down, you can create a floor for them from another box. This is the floor. I'll move it to position 0, 0, 0. Ready. For objects to become physical, acquire properties and mass, and begin falling, there is a corresponding component in the Component tab, Physics, Rigid Body. Components from this top tab are usually not very convenient to choose. The object itself in the inspector has the Add Component button. What is especially convenient here is that you can enter and select what you need by searching. I usually do it this way. We've added a rigid body, which has, for example, a mass, and some other parameters related to a physical object. But right now the boxes are not falling for some reason. It's because now we are in edit mode and haven't yet launched the game. Let's talk about that. Here at the top is a play button. It starts the game. In the game window, we see what our game looks like in the end. So, let's click play. The boxes are falling. There is one more thing that is important to say. While we are in play mode, the game is going on, and stuff like physical simulation works. In this mode, you can test something and see what will happen there if you create more boxes. But the important point is that all the changes that you make in play mode are rolled back after exiting this mode. If you create something, change the materials of objects, and then exit play mode, then everything will roll back. This is actually convenient because it allows you to experiment with parameters. Keep this in mind, because sometimes you may forget that you have entered play mode and have already changed a lot of things, and then get upset that everything has been cancelled. So just keep an eye on this button. What else is there to say? The key thing is that we press and release this button. But there is also, for example, a pause button. You can pause the game while it's going on. This is very important because in this mode you can look at some parameters, scenes, object positions, and how your scripts work there. When the game is on pause, you can still click it like this, frame by frame. This is very important for testing. To clearly catch the moment when an event happens and see it in detail, there is also this trick. You can click the pause button at the beginning, then the play button. The game will start, but in the first frame, it will be as if it's on pause. You can look carefully at your first frame and click your game frame by frame like this. Let's add some more components to the object so that we go through it again. For example, we have a box and I will attach components, effects, and trail renderer to it. This is a tail that will move behind it. This pink color in Unity means that this object has some problems with the material. In this case, the material is simply not assigned. The trail has a materials section. We need to place some material here. That is why we need to create a new one. I'll call it trail, and let it be bright, maybe orange. Here, we select a box and place the material into it. That's it. Now the box is followed by this tail. Here, you can change some of the parameters of this tail. If you encounter a new component and change all of its parameters, it becomes clear how they work and what they are responsible for. Now our box is falling and the tail is also trailing behind it. If you want to make the tail smaller, there is a time parameter. It's like the time of its life. If you set this to 0.5, then it will live for half a second, and then this is what we'll see. It is important to remember that I will now make these changes in play mode, so when I exit this mode, the time will reset to the starting value. So you just need to remember this number, and then re-enter it. And that's the way this works. I also want to note that sometimes it's not the best practice to take one object and start placing a lot of different components on it. First of all, it is just not very convenient to manage them. A more suitable option would look like this. If you want this box to have a tail, you can create an empty object inside it. Create empty and place a component onto this object. Add it here. You can copy components. Right-click it, select Copy Component, then remove it from here. Remove. Then, having selected this object, click here and select Paste Component as New. This is how you can copy an object from one component, from one object to another. The result will be the same. We also have an object and the tail is moving behind it, but the advantage here is that everything looks neater and more structured. There is no pylon, just one object. And in addition, we can move this point to some other position of our box. We can create several such objects inside it, and we essentially create our objects from such a hierarchy of game objects and components in them. Something strange has happened. Let's summarize. All we see in Unity is an empty game object with several components. All objects from the Game Object tab can be made of standard components. Working in Unity is a constant switching between play mode and edit mode. The changes we make in play mode are not saved when we exit it. In many cases, it is convenient to transfer components, not to the parent object, but to empty daughter objects. Later, we'll learn how to create our own components. There are no standard objects that can rotate a coin at a certain speed, make it assemble, or make a move for our character. We will do all this by creating our own scripts or components.